Well, hello everybody. It's been a while. I've been out working in Wyoming, as I alluded in some of my previous videos, and I wanted to share some thoughts that I had while I was out there. Not about the state generally, but about certain kind of ideas that visiting there prompted me to think about. I've been to Wyoming before. I've vacationed there in the past when I was young. Um, a couple years ago, I wasn't working there, but I was working in Utah, and I would drive through Wyoming. But this was the first time that I was spending an extended period. I was in the far eastern part of the state, the part that is more like the Great Plains, the high plains, semi-arid environment, very few trees. Often you could see horizon to horizon and see no trees whatsoever, or no buildings or overt sign of human habitation, although there certainly the hand of man was everywhere to be found if you look closely. Um, it was an area really that reminded me of two places. It reminded me of Iceland because it was so sparsely populated. The towns tended to be at least 20 or 30 miles apart and sometimes more, 40 or 50 miles. And town, these would be places with 1,000, 2,000, sometimes 200 people, with a handful, if more than one business between them. So you see things like a breakdown of the division of labor, where instead of having stores that specialize in different things, you have like one general store it's the gas station, it's the shopping market, it's the place where you rent food, it's the pizza place, it's everything. And I saw that a little bit in Iceland, and I've seen it in other very rural areas, and that's something that I definitely noticed in Wyoming. But the other thing is, a lot of people don't realize is that eastern Wyoming is the largest coal producing region in the United States. In fact, Wyoming produces as much coal as either all the other states combined or the next top 10. So more than West Virginia, more than Kentucky and Pennsylvania, and Alabama and Ohio and all those states put together. Wyoming produces that much coal or more. And I was actually working very, very close to some of the major rail lines serving some of the strip mines. And these strip mines are massive, massive industrial affairs. Uh, they really do seem out of place because you are in the middle of nowhere. It's a ranch area. There's antelope and mule deer everywhere, and then you see this mass industrial buildup. And actually, it reminded me of the movie Avatar, where you have like this large empty planet basically with then this very uh, specialized large scale industry that's kind of the whole reason it's there. Like the nearest town to me was 10 miles away, and that town exists basically not as a company town, but indirectly to service and house people who work at in the areas associated with the coal mines. So uh, now that's all interesting, but that's not what I really want to talk about here. Before I left, I was very concerned because not like in a existential sense, but like I've become quite a uh, habitual gym rat at this point, and I was really worried that I was going to end up in a place where I would be unable to work out, and that my progress in the gym, such as it is, and I have a very explicit program that I attempt to follow, and when I'm not working, I follow quite easily. Um, that I would be in a situation where there would be no gyms available. Now, obviously, you can do things like body weight workouts. There's stuff you can use. You can have dumbbells and kettlebells and rubber bands, and there's lots of stuff that you can do without a gym. And I have been in situations where I had to do that. So I did not know if there was going to be a gym around or not. So I came prepared to be able to do workouts on my own without a gym being present. But there's certainly a lot of things, a lot of the resistance exercises you need heavier stuff, you need equipment, you need benches and weights, and that's something that's very, very hard to replicate uh, on your own. I mean, you can buy that stuff as well, but then to travel across the country with, an entire gym is prohibitive, and I don't know one to take. So now, this town that was about 10 miles from me had about 1,500 people in it. And a town with 1,500 people in it is not going to have, like I said, a big diversity of businesses. There's not enough of a population to support a diversified industry unless it's some kind of really, really hot tourist destination that has a big commercial district servicing them, which it wasn't. There was a state highway that ran through the area, but this is a 2-lane highway. Although there is traffic on it for sure, it's not like a major freeway. It's not a place where there's going to be tons and tons of traffic. So there were businesses here, but there weren't that many. And I was very skeptical that there were going to be any options in terms of working out. And lo and behold, I was pleasantly surprised. There was a beautiful, brand new, relatively speaking, well furnished, well stocked recreational facility in this little town. And it was run by the county. And doing my research and figuring out, what kind of stuff that they had and where it came from, it turns out this county had a large tax revenue from these coal mines, disproportionate to the population. In this county, which is a huge area, this county would probably, I don't know its exact dimensions, but probably 80 or 90 miles square or something like that. Had 3 towns in it. Now one had about 10,000 people and the other two both had less than 2. And the county decided to take the revenue, some of the revenue anyway, I'm sure it wasn't all, that they were raising from taxing these coal mines. And they weren't exactly sure what to do it, so they decided to build a rec center in each of the 3 towns. So every town in this county has a state-of-the-art rec center built for it. And so like this facility, even though it's servicing a town of 1,500, 1,800 people, was almost as nice and almost as large as the gym that I go to in Manchester, which is serving an area, not just Manchester, but the surrounding area of somewhere around 250,000 people, 250,000 relatively wealthy people. And yet this very small town had this very large, I mean, it had full weight room, full cardio room, large spaces, basketball court, volleyball nets, and then it had one of the nicest pools I've ever seen, replete with diving boards, swimming lanes, lily pads, cargo nets that you can run across, and actually a man-made river. It was a couple 100 feet long that they could actually turn a valve to create a current. So you could either float in circles all night if you wanted, or walk against the current as a form of exercise. Something that I've never seen anywhere else. And it actually also reminded me of Iceland, because Iceland is very big on having municipal pools that are kind of act as like recreational areas for people to go. Very, very similar to that. I don't know how much this pool would have cost, but it would have probably been in, $1, $2, $3 million, something like that. It's nicer than the pool at my gym, which again is the nicest gym in the state of New Hampshire and servicing at least 250,000 people. I mean, population-wise, that's not how many members there are, but and I was of course pleased that this was an option. As a non-resident, I was able to use it at a pretty low fee, and turned out that was great. But what was interesting is after I started attending, it became very clear this place was empty. Nobody used it, or very, very few people used it. The pool, this large, nice, well-furnished, new, presumably expensive to build and expensive to operate pool, sat unused. Uh, they had lifeguards, local teenagers basically who were hired as lifeguards, and you would go and they would be in there just cleaning everything because there was nothing else for them to do. So they were always spraying down the floors, scrubbing the floors. And I actually talked to some of them, and they said there are days where literally nobody uses the pool at all. Not one person in a whole day. And yes, sometimes they do have it. It would be hyperbole to say it's never used, but we're talking like, you know, one person here, one person there. Very, very low usage. Weight room was almost completely empty, with the exception of 2 or 3 oil rig workers, so people like me who were not local, who were only in the area potentially for 2 or 3 weeks, who were using it. And then there was an old man and his grandson, who I thought were probably locals, but after I talked to them, found no, indeed, they were from out of state, and they were just in the state for a month to do some cattle ranching, and then they were gone. So the entire time that I was there, people from this town, or even people from Wyoming, period, never used the weight room, never used the cardio room, and only with the most sparing occurrence used the pool either. Now, you know, in terms of all the things that government can spend money on, um, a recreational center and an underused pool and underused weight room is certainly not on the top of my list of things that, are egregious about government or spending or taxation. Absolutely not. There's a whole list of other things that are obviously take precedence. But what it is interesting is it illustrates that without with the divorce from the market, with the divorce from prices and profits and buying and selling and losses, you get malinvestment. You get this vast amount of resources, relatively speaking, invested into something that people don't use or don't use very often. There's no way. I mean, the membership fees for the number of people who were using it would have to have been like in the tens of thousands of dollars a month per person to justify how much this place had to cost to heat, to pay for the staff, to pay for the chemicals, to keep the pool. Like, there's absolutely no way this place is even remotely self-sufficient in terms of income. And again, it's one of those things where how how do you even begin to address the problem of whether something is worth the tax investment or not? Um, as soon as you cut it away from the ability to lose money and the incentive to profit, then there's no real way. You can develop rubrics to try and justify what you're doing, but you have to make very arbitrary assumptions about what people value and things like that. So, let's we think about it like how because I've heard some politicians when people have criticized other projects, not specifically this one, but maybe a bridge or a bus line. I remember in my home state, the local bus agency had lobbied to increase the routes, to run later until like 4 a.m. instead of stopping at 10 or 11. And they eventually got this passed at the cost of several $1 million a year. And then the local news station did a study, and it turned out that literally no one was using it, or one or two people were using it, and there was no way that their $1 ticket was justifying the investment. And yet the bus company could still say, no, some people use it. It's a valuable thing for our community because some people use it. And I've heard many politicians refrain from that, and they could very easily, in this case, say, well, sure, it's not very busy and there's hardly anyone there, and the staff outnumbers the people using it on a daily, regular basis, but some people use it. And it's like, well, if that's the measure, then everything is justifiable, right? If the determining factor of whether a program is justifiable or warranted is that somebody benefits, then every program ever, no matter what it does or doesn't do, benefits somebody. Even programs that directly harm people have some people who benefit from it. Even the people who indirectly benefit from the harm would be people who benefit from it. So, like, this is a rubric that can justify anything. Um, if we were going to look at it and be like, and this is another thing that kind of, there's two separate issues here. Uh, but people can look and say, well, it's just a good thing that people are healthy, which I agree that it's a good thing that people be healthy, but that doesn't then justify any expenditure that has that as an ostensible goal. I think the main thing that's accomplished with this health facility, this recreation center, is it provides employment for the teenagers in the town, basically, or a few of them anyway. Um, simply have a gym be in a place does not mean that you have health outcomes that you want. Yes, some people do use it, but not very many. And you'd have to say, well, how many need to use it for it to matter? How many is enough or not, or too few? What's the if under 100 use it a day, that's not enough, or if under 50, or if over 1,000. But then the other thing is, so what, they use it. So some people go in there and they swim in the pool for a little bit and then they leave. What was the health benefit from that? What was the health benefit if they came and they used the treadmill for 10 minutes and then talked to the hostess for an hour? There's no real way to I mean, you can measure health outcomes on an individual person, but even in scientific studies, it's very difficult to, well, maybe their diet was wrong, or maybe there's something else going on. So like, even if you saw an increase in health outcomes in the city, in this little town anyway, it'd be very hard to attribute it to this rec center being there or not being there, since there's so many other factors involved. So like, y- it, it's not enough to say that something is vaguely good, then we should throw money at, ostensibly for that reason. If people aren't using it for that, people are using it just for other reasons or not in the right way or not sufficiently, like, I mean, like you could have a healthy, like a health food store, right, that has healthy food in it. And that ostensibly could be good, but if people are only eating a tiny little bit there and then they're still eating a ton of crap from elsewhere, then you probably haven't done anything really. And I think this is definitely the case with this place. And this is just an example. We could go all over. I mean, then the other thing that people like to say is, uh, I should do a whole video on public goods. I think that I was going to do it a couple years ago, and it needs to be covered, like, I think more specifically than this. But one problem I have with the public goods idea is that, they say, well, it's a good that is non-excludable, that, nobody, uh, that if you provide it, you can't exclude people from taking advantage of it, and so, then there's no incentive to produce it or whatever. And there's a couple of problems with that, but one of them is, it's very easy to paint anything in that light. You could say, well, a gym isn't like that because you can have members who have to pay, and you can exclude people pretty easily, right? So how is that? How could that ever be construed as a public good? It's like, well, it's really easy actually. All you have to do is say, well, the gym has the result that people are healthier, the people who go there, and if people who go there become healthier, and they get in better shape, well, that has a indirectly is a public good, because then you have people who are healthier walking around, and all that's pleasing on the eyes, and it's also good for the healthcare system, because like if 5% of the people are the ones going to the gym and they're the ones paying for it, but then they don't have to go to the hospital as much, or they don't need as expensive treatment, then they're going to reduce healthcare costs for everybody else. And there's no, and this is like true, it's economics, right? If you're able to reduce demand because you're healthy, then, all things being equal, you're going to reduce the price. And you can't say, well, when healthcare goes down in price, I only want it to go down for me, not everyone else. It will go down for everyone. And the other problem with public goods, I think, is that, uh, who yes, you cause the price to go down for everybody. Let's say you go to the gym, you get healthy, you don't have to go to the hospital. Instead of going to the hospital 4 times a year, you only have to go once a year. Instead of having to need, you know, uh, $1,000 in prescriptions every year, now you only need $100 in prescriptions every year. Just totally arbitrary numbers. Um, that's going to lower prices for everybody, right? But then so everybody benefits. So ergo, gym memberships are a public good, or health is a public good. Um, but then what that kind of ignores is that, yeah, everyone has slightly lower healthcare costs, but you have way lower healthcare costs, because they're only getting the marginal decrease that happens to everything. You're getting an absolute lower fee, and then you're getting all the benefits it has from, being healthier, whatever those may be. So yes, maybe everyone gets some benefit, but there's a concentration of benefits. And another analogy I like for this is a gun ownership. The proliferations of guns in society has a deterrent effect, at least on certain types of crime. Criminals become very unlikely to do things like break into homes that are occupied, with the occupants in there, in societies and in areas where gun ownerships are high, because that's a very, very risky, indeed nearly suicidal prospect. If 50% or 75% of the households in an area have guns in them, breaking into them when they're empty is obviously very safe relative to breaking into them when they're occupied, because you could get shot. Now, in those societies where you have 50 to 75% or more people owning guns, even the people who don't own guns benefit from that reduction in crime, right? The criminal is very unlikely to know, hey, this house doesn't have a gun in it. unless, it's one of those liberals who posts a sign that says, I'm against guns and I don't have guns in my house, which none of them do, strangely enough. Um, and yet, people wouldn't say that owning a gun is a public good because, yes, even though it's true that there's a benefit to everybody, and it's not just that. If there were to be, in the very unlikely situation that where there's a mass shooting and a gun owner intercedes, then he's helped more than just himself, and that he or she, and sometimes it is a woman actually, uh, can't restrict who that benefits, but it benefits them the most, right? If if I have a gun, yes, I can protect you, but I can protect myself that much better, right? So there's still an incentive to and I mean, there's other reasons to own a gun privately besides defense, which is a large part of why people own them. But like, if we were just looking at, um, defense and deterrence, there's still a reason for a person to buy and own a gun, even though there are benefits that accrue to everybody because of that. Similarly, the fact that you go to the gym and that you live a healthy lifestyle and that you eat healthy food and all these other good things, we could argue, yeah, that benefits society generally, that everyone benefits because you're not going to the hospital as much, you're not pushing up prices on healthcare, whether it be pharmaceutical care or doctor care or hospital access or whatever it is. Um, and also, maybe you look better, so like you're just more aesthetically pleasing to the eye, and more people, he's a healthy person, blah blah blah. You can't restrict that, but then you have many, many more, much more definite benefits personally, and so there's still an incentive for to do it. So I, not to ramble too much, but like I think that there's a whole bunch of problems with like the idea of public goods. The other thing is a lot of the things that people say are like, I had a really good discussion about this at Students for Liberty last year with a subscriber of mine who came up, and I think he went to George Mason, and it's very there's lots of things that economists say are public goods, and then they seem to get provided without government anyway. And they'll say things like, well, such and such is public good, so it's impossible, it can't be provided without the state forcing people to pay for it because there's no way to exclude people from benefiting. And they'll do things like this, they'll say like defense is a public good, it can't be excluded, or uh, or lighthouses, and it's like, well, no offense to these economists, maybe they're great economists and they understand economics very well. And like theoretically, I understand like conceptually what a public good it works and why it would make sense that it would not be provided, or either if it's not, at least not provided at an optimum level, which is a slightly better but less convincing argument, if that makes any sense. Um, but then what I was telling this guy was, I don't think that these economists are experts, and I don't mean that they're not expert economists. I think that they're not experts on like defense. So you have some guy, maybe he might be a Nobel laureate, saying, you know, uh, public goods, defense is a public good. What do they know about defense though? Do they ever even hold a weapon? Have they ever fought in a battle? Have they ever actually done any? Do they work with a defense contractor? Do they work with a defense company? Do they work with a security company? Do they know anything about that kind of stuff? And the answer is usually not. And a good example of this is to say, well, lighthouses are a public good. A lighthouse owner can't exclude people who they don't like from the light. Now, technologically speaking, this is no longer true. Of course, lighthouses are technologically speaking nowhere near as necessary, if at all necessary, as they used to be with GPS. Hypothetically, nowadays there could be ways you dial in your code and they turns on the light, but it wasn't like that in the past. And economists say, see, lighthouses can't possibly operate in the private market without tax subsidy because they're public good. There's no way to exclude ships who don't pay. And they would blithely kind of say that because it makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying they're stupid or whatever for reaching that conclusion, but they didn't go look at the history of lighthouses. They didn't actually empirically study lighthouses. They don't know anything about lighthouses other than their basic awareness of their existence. And there's a really good article, I think it was in Mises, but I'm not sure. The Mises Institute put out, where there actually were lighthouses that were operating privately. It was for profit. They were owned by people. The lighthouse keeper would go to the ports and say, hey, we use my lights, and this is what I need to keep it on. And they would pay or whatever. I don't remember all the details from the article. Now you could make the argument like, well, okay, so some of them were making money and were able to run it as a profit, but maybe there wouldn't have been as many as there should have been, and so like the levels would have been suboptimal. And like, yes, that's an argument you can make, but you can't make the argument that they couldn't exist because they did, right? Radio is another good example. Radio is definitely a public good even now, and you know, radio should not be possible according to public goods theory. Like there should be no radio, and it's like, well, they bundle it with other things like the advertising and whatnot, and it's like, well, okay, but like if it, then that means that it's effectively not a public good if they have found a way to make or at least that the public goods theory it doesn't mean that things can't be provided. Now, the argument that, well, maybe they're not provided optimal, I'd really like to know how you can tell what the optimal, like how many lighthouses are there supposed to be and how many is too many, right? Like this is the whole argument about the gym again. How many people have to use it? How many gyms do there need to be? What kind of equipment does there need to be, or is it not enough or too much? And you have to make very, very crude kind of assumptions about what people need and things like that. And I know a lot of people when they talk about stuff like this, they say it's not a crude assumption to assume that people need X, Y, and Z, and that's not really something that you can question. And I think that that's false, because if you ask 10 different economists or 10 different sociologists or 10 different people, what are your needs? Yeah, they can give very general things like, oh yeah, you need food and you need water, but like the material goods and resources that we utilize to live, there is no thing called food, right? You don't have a box and it's food. It's probably in that case, millions, if not more, different things with all kinds of different uh, production sequences and distribution sequences and histories and stuff like that. And it's like, which combination of these things do you need? Does food mean filet mignon and caviar and truffle butter and fruit roll-ups and macaroni and cheese, or does it mean a certain number of you know uh, carbohydrates from a certain type of source? And if you ask that and you say let's get specific, people give wildly different answers. you know I mean, there's scientists who say, well, there's caloric minimums and stuff, but those vary by person, right? I mean, I'm 6'2", I'm a male. My caloric needs are not the same as a 5'6" woman who maybe weighs 100 pounds less than me, and or the same height, the same size man, but at a different time in his life, different and I think that's pretty obvious. But then very few people who talk about needs based uh, allocations are kind of willing to discuss in those terms, because then it becomes very inegalitarian very quickly. Because then we talk about, you need 2,500 calories a day, you only need 1,500 calories a day. Well, that's not fair. So we're going to give everybody like 2,500. Well, then one person's getting a surplus of their need, the other person is getting just the bare minimum. Or are we going to say, well, we're going to set the level 1,000 calories above the highest level person? Well, still, then there's the surplus again. Or we're going to set it 1,000 calories above whatever your level is. And it's like, oh, so if she needs 1,500 and I need 2,500, then I'll get 3,500 and she'll get 2,500. And it's like, well, then you're still giving more to the one person. Why is that fair? Um, so like the scientific kind of qualitative technological technocratic approach yields very, very inegalitarian results, which is something that is anathema to most of the people who are using these arguments to justify the programs, because the programs that they're looking for are are almost always ones that have some sort of egalitarian outcome in mind, which is not what you're going to get if you start looking, well, this person is this and this and this, and he's a man and she's a woman, and he's this age and the other person's that age, and right. So it's it's very, very, very hard to, and I say very hard, I think it's impossible. You can make up rubrics, right? But they're just made up, right? You're just saying, well, we're going to assume that lighthouses is for the common good, or defense. And defense is the other really big one. And when people say defense is a public good, I think and then they'll say, well, think about like a missile defense system that shoots other missiles out of the sky, which supposedly the U.S. government has. And I don't think that the one that they have now is actually really does that. But hypothetically, it could exist, and maybe it will at some point. But then again, something like a fortress, a defensive perimeter or a bunker, well, these are totally excludable. Like the government has bunkers, they have underground, bomb shelters, and are very, very, very excludable. They have barbed wire fences and signs and guards, and if the taxpayers who made them possible ever tried to get into them, they would be mowed down mercilessly. So those are definitely excludable. So when people say defense is not an excludable good, I think what they mean is certain weapon systems don't seem that excludable. So like a missile system, or just if we're going to science fiction, a force field. If you put a force field around a country or a city or a planet, how could you couldn't really exclude people from that. But to say that certain defensive systems may not be excludable doesn't mean that defense in general is excludable. Uh, Having access to a bunker, having access to a fortress, having access to a firearm, these are all things that, even though they might have wider benefits to other people who don't directly own them or have them, they have a much higher benefit to the people who are there, right? So the fortress might be a deterrent. The fortress might keep an attacker away, or limit the ability of attacker to occupy an area. And so if you're not in the fortress, you might get a benefit from that, but you won't get as much benefit as if you're actually there behind the walls or underground or however it is. The same thing is in joining a military unit of some type. Sure, you might get rescued by a military unit operating in your area that's made up from your neighbors and other people that you don't join, but you don't have as much benefit as if you're actually there. Uh, you know, in camaraderie of arms with like-minded, mutually interested people. So uh, I think that, and then the other problem is it just assumes that it's a service and that it's a value, right? So like, let's say you do have the force field, and some of the people in the city say, I actually don't want this. Like, I think that the invaders that are coming are better than the people who live here now, or I'm ambivalent. I don't care if they come or attack. And it's very hard. You have to make the assumption that no, you don't get to decide what's a service and what's not a service. And this is a good kind of definition. A service is something that both parties have to agree to, right? You can't, the squeegee, when you get stuck in traffic and a guy comes up and like does your window without asking you or giving any waiting for any kind of indication that you're interested in having that happen, he hasn't provided you with a service. He's done an action, and now he's demanding money on he's doing something on the, and then using that as a pretext to take your money. That's not a service. You both have to agree, right? So you can't just say, I'm going to build a force field, or I'm going to build a wall, and now you all owe everything to me because I've done this thing. If they haven't asked you to do it, then if they don't want it, maybe they're a pacifist. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they think that it's not necessary. You're like, I don't need a force field. I'm in a militia. I pay my dues to, and we have a bunker, and I don't need a force field. So it's not a service to me. And there is no kind of, yes, it really is. Like, scientifically, it really is a service, and you are just being a freeloader for not wanting to pay for whatever things that I do and then say that you owe me for because I say that they're services. That's not how it works. And you have to make assumptions like that for, I think, all the arguments, uh, around public goods. And again, it's such a slippery slope to then just be like, well, sure, you don't get healthier by going to the gym, but healthcare costs go down, and so you benefited, so you should be forced to subsidize. The taxing, so let's say 20 people a month go to this gym I was talking about. Well, those 20 people a month, if they got healthier, and they don't have any kind of metric to say that they did, but let's just for the sake of argument say that they did get healthier. Well, that lowered healthcare costs for everyone else in that town and actually everywhere. I mean, if we're going by the Supreme Court, anything that you do, even if you consume it yourself, if it affects the price, then it's interstate commerce, um, right? So by that very, very broad permissive definition, that like, everything is a public good, everything is tax fundable, tax controllable. And there's that other, I don't even know if it has a name for it, but the argument that anything that you do, if it has an effect on other people, then the state has a right to intercede. And again, that goes to the, okay, so party A and party B have an exchange. Why does party C get to come and then say, no, you both owe me a debt? That's the you didn't build it. Like, you may have paid for everything along the way, but since it involves the division of labor, and you grew up in a society, then you owe not society generally, but the state specifically, whatever revenue the state wants to take and to be spent however the state wants to spend it. So yeah, this has kind of been a little bit rambly, and I'm sorry. Public goods should be addressed, I think, in more detail in their own video. And I realize that like a gym in Wyoming is not necessarily a public good, although people could very easily make that argument and just say, oh no, they're like, you're healthier, so you're helping society, and that means that the subsidy to help to keep you healthy is a good idea. So yes, I utilize this gym quite a bit, and I'm grateful for it. I was able to push up my strength just a little bit in the couple weeks that I was there. Um, and yet I don't think it's justifiable at all. I don't think that the people there are better off to have their income taken from them, or the coal companies are better off from having their revenue taken from them and then reallocated to whatever whimsical thing the state bureaucrats, and this is assuming, of course, that like they're being true Benthamite, they're trying to do what they think is best, and not that they're just being corrupt and using this as a way to, I wonder who got the contracts to build it. I wonder whose kids got hired to work there. Maybe the people, the city council people or the county commission people like gyms and like pools, and so they were basically building themselves a recreational facility. I don't know if any of that's true, but it very well could be. But even it's funny because even if that could be admitted and was like provable, if we could even say, look, we know that this was corruption, we know that this was done to pay contractors that this guy's brother-in-law owns, and yada yada yada, the defenders would still say, yeah, it doesn't matter, it's still a public good, and it's still good that they did that. So I feel like in such a broad understanding that public goods are non-falsifiable, in the way that a lot of people couch them. So anyway, there'll be some more videos coming up soon. I've been back for about a week. It's been good to be back. It's always good to be back to New Hampshire. And I don't know, talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.